Karen Sullivan, K-A-R-E-N-S-U-L-L-I-V-A-N.
Say good afternoon, Dr. Sullivan.
Good afternoon.
Could you tell the jurors how you are currently employed?
I'm the Chief Medical Examiner for the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office here in Atlanta.
And can you tell the jurors how long have you worked within the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
Part-time beginning in July of 2003 till October 2007, and then full-time since October 2007.
And you said you are the Chief Medical Examiner. Can you explain to the jurors how long you've been the Chief?
Since spring of 2021.
And can you tell the jurors a little bit about what the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office does?
We determine cause and manner of death of people who die of sudden, unexpected, or unexplained causes, people who die as a result of injury, either self-inflicted or inflicted by another person.
And as a part of that, can you tell the jurors what is an autopsy?
An autopsy is both an external and an internal examination of a person's body to determine the presence of natural disease processes or injuries to determine the cause and manner of death.
And what you just described, can you tell the jurors in relation to that, what is forensic pathology?
Well, forensic pathology is specifically using autopsies or external examinations to determine a person's cause and manner of death under those circumstances I mentioned a moment ago.
And at this time, Your Honor, the state is going to tender Dr. Karen Sullivan as an expert in forensic pathology.
All right, she's so qualified and may testify as such.
Now, I want to direct your attention to February 24th of 2019. Did you have the occasion to perform an autopsy on 15-year-old Jamari Holmes?
I'm sorry, what was the date that you said again?
February 24th of 2019.
Yes, I did.
And during that autopsy of Jamari Holmes, can you tell the jurors, were photographs taken during the autopsy procedures?
Yes.
And at the conclusion of the autopsy, did you memorialize your findings and conclusions in a report like you've described here today?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in looking at state's exhibits, we'll start with state's exhibit 25 NN through 28 NN. Can you tell the jurors, do you recognize those exhibits?
I do.
And can you tell the jurors how you recognize them and what they are?
They're copies of photographs that were taken during Mr. Holmes's autopsy. Some of the photographs have a small ruler in them that has Mr. Holmes's autopsy or Fulton County Medical Examiner's case number on it.
And in state's exhibit 29 NN, can you tell the jurors, do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
It's a copy of Mr. Holmes's autopsy report that I completed.
Okay. And in the photographs you've described in state's exhibits 25 NN through 28 NN, do they fairly and accurately depict the photos that were taken during the autopsy of Jamari Holmes on February 24th of 2019?
They do.
And is state's exhibit 29 NN a fair and accurate copy of the report that you authored in relation to the autopsy performed on Mr. Holmes back on February 24th of 2019?
It is.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender what's been marked as state's exhibits 25 NN through 29 NN.
Those are admitted.
Now, Dr. Sullivan, you just mentioned a unique case number or a case number that was associated with this case in relation to the death of 15-year-old Mr. Holmes. Can you tell the jurors how that case number is specifically assigned not only to this case, but all the cases that you perform autopsies on?
Well, in our office, we have a number of medical legal death investigators who take death calls either from hospitals where someone has died or from police officers at a scene of death. And when the investigator takes the case, then they assign sequentially a case number to it. For example, the first case of this year, 2024, would have been 2024 2-0001. Then the next case that was reported was 2. Then the next case it would have been 3. So Mr. Holmes's case number was 2019-0370. So his death was number 370 reported in the year 2019.
Now, in relation to the work you do when performing an autopsy, can you tell the jurors what soot is and how it is important or related to your performing an autopsy and the conclusions that you make?
Well, when a gun is fired, the gunpowder burns, and the gas that's produced is what propels the bullet down the muzzle of the gun and out of the barrel. The burnt gunpowder can produce a fine ash like you see in the fireplace after you burn wood in the wintertime. That ash can deposit on the skin. That ash will be called soot. You can see soot on a person's body, assuming there's nothing between the muzzle of the gun and the person who is being shot, up to about 12 inches. After about 12 inches, then that soot doesn't have enough energy to reach the person's body and deposit on it. Also exiting the muzzle of the gun are burning and unburnt gunpowder particles that can strike the skin and make small scrapes in the skin called stippling. Stippling is seen on the body from a distance of a few inches to up to about 3 feet for most handguns, after which those gunpowder particles don't have enough energy to reach the person's body and they fall away. So after about 3 feet distance from the muzzle of the gun to the person who is shot, you'll see neither soot nor stippling on a person's body, assuming there's no intervening object between the muzzle of the gun and the person who is shot.
And on the screen before you, it states Exhibit 25, and can you tell the jurors, I guess, the purpose of this photo that you take at the initial outset of an autopsy?
This is one of the standard sets of photos. It's called a facial identification photograph that simply shows the decedent's face.
Okay, and can you tell the jurors kind of what are the first steps that you take in performing an autopsy here on Mr. Holmes, but in general when doing an autopsy and the procedures that go along with it?
Well, after the decedent's body bag is open, then the doctor is looking at the person for any evidence of natural disease processes and any injuries and documenting that. At the same time, the forensic technician is writing down any clothing or personal effects that were received with the person, and the photographer is taking photographs of the person as they are received with clothing or medical intervention and then without, and then also any external evidence of natural disease processes and injuries. And after the photographs are obtained, then at the direction of the doctor, the internal examination occurs where the forensic technician eviscerates the body, meaning the internal organs are removed, and the doctor is examining them both, again, for natural disease processes and injuries.
Now, can you tell the jurors in doing the initial steps that you just described as it relates to the autopsy of Jamari Holmes, can you tell the jurors that what we're looking at in State Exhibit 6 and in to the initial injuries that you observed to Mr. Holmes?
And so this is the back of Mr. Holmes's head. His head is lying on a head block. His face would be towards the top of the picture, the back of his head towards the bottom of the picture where the small ruler is. And there's a gunshot wound of the head that's partially seen in this photograph.
And if we move to State Exhibit 27, and can you tell the jurors, is this the same gunshot wound that you just described, but with the hair shaped around it?
It is.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, as you were doing your autopsy, were you able to I guess, determine the trajectory or the pathway of travel as it relates to the projectile that entered Mr. Holmes' back of his head?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors how you're able to do that and what, I guess, the trajectory of the path of travel showed in this case?
Well, in this case, the path of the projectile was back to front with minimal deviation or variance in other directions. And I used, by looking at the entrance wound, entrance wounds tend to have an abrasion or scrape of the skin because the bullet is scraping the skin as it enters the body, and that allows you to tell that it's an entrance wound. In this case, you're looking at Mr. Holmes's head from the side. It's as though he's laying on his left-hand side with his right ear up. So the tag is actually the back of his head, and just above that, that scraped area is the abrasion. And so the bullet is traveling from the tag area, which is the back of the head, towards the left-hand side of the photo, which is the top of the head.
Okay. And you kind of discussed earlier what soot and stippling is. Can you tell the jurors, did you see either soot or stippling as it relates to the gunshot wound in the back of the head of Jamari Holmes?
No, neither soot nor stippling was on the scan.
And based on your training and experience and what you've described here today, can you tell the jurors what that, I guess, means or how that impacts your findings and conclusions as it relates to how close the barrel of a gun was to the back of Mr. Holmes' head?
Well, assuming that there's no intervening object between the muzzle of the gun and Mr. Holmes' head, the muzzle of the gun was at least 3 feet away from Mr. Holmes' head.
Now, I guess, can you describe to the jurors, based on, I guess, the autopsy, both the external and internal examination that you described, what areas of the brain were injured and, I guess, hit by the bullet or the projectiles that traveled through Mr. Holmes' brain?
Well, there were injuries to the left side of the skull and the left cerebral hemisphere, which is the larger part of the brain on the left-hand side.
And can you tell the jurors the left cerebral hemisphere, I guess, what motor functions or what functions does that area of the brain control in the human body?
Well, it has partial control over the right side of the body, but in addition to the structures that are directly impacted by the bullet going through Mr. Holmes' head, the concussive force of the gunshot wound damages areas of the brain even away from the direct wound path. So the parts of the brain, for example, in the brainstem that control cardiac and respiratory functions, those are also be affected.
And we've talked about an entry wound here and how you're able to determine the difference between an entry and exit wound. Can you tell the jurors in your examination, were you able to find or locate an exit wound?
No.
Okay. And based upon that, you described to the jurors that there's an internal examination where organs are removed from here Mr. Holmes' body, correct?
Correct.
And in this instance, was Mr. Holmes' physical brain removed from his head?
It was.
And is an examination done, I guess, in regards to looking for any projectiles that remain within Mr. Holmes' brain?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors, were you able to locate any projectiles in Mr. Holmes' brain, and where about within his head did you find?
Well, there was a fragmented projectile. There were at least 2 large pieces of the bullet that were recovered, and that's seen in this picture, and they were recovered from the wound track.
Okay, and you said they were recovered from the wound track. Once you recovered them and you photographed them, can you tell the jurors what the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office does with here this projectile removed from Mr. Holmes' brain?
After it's photographed, it's sealed in an evidence box, which is put in a locked box in our office until it can be transported to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for ballistic analysis.
Now, after you have completed the autopsy and all the procedures you've described here today, as it relates to this case involving Jamari Holmes, can you tell the jurors, were you able to determine the cause of death for Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
And what was the cause of death for Mr. Holmes in this case?
Gunshot wound of the head.
Okay. And you discussed earlier the difference between cause and manner of death. Can you tell the jurors, based on your procedures and the autopsy that you performed, what you were able to determine or conclude the manner of death was as it relates to Jamari Holmes?
Homicide.
And lastly, Dr. Sullivan, you talked about the photographing that is done by the techs who were working alongside of you. Today we've seen 4 photographs. Are more than 4 photographs taken of the entire procedure as it relates to the autopsies that you performed, but specifically the autopsy performed on Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
Okay. And do the 4 pictures that were shown to the jury kind of capture, encapsulate the wounds that Mr. Holmes suffered, as well as the projectile that was removed from his brain?
Yes, they do.
Your Honor, I don't have anything further to reiterate.
All right, any cross for this witness?
Briefly, Your Honor. Doctor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What day did you perform this autopsy?
On Sunday, February 24th, 2019.
And you have testified at hearings regarding this case previously, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and the defendants in this case in the death of Jamari Holmes were Rodelius Ryan and Damone Blaylock, correct?
I do not know.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
No questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you for your time. Call your next witness.